So today, the title of my sermon is called The Greatest Call. And I know we're in Canada, but I'm sure some of you guys know about the National Football League. There was this guy named Kurt Warner, and he's got an interesting story. After playing college football at Northern Iowa, he went undrafted in the 1994 NFL Draft. He received an invite to the Green Bay Packers to their training camp, but he got cut shortly after. So he had no NFL offers on the table. He ended up going back to a grocery store called Hy-Vee in Cedar Falls, and he was working there. He was earning $5.50 an hour while still training for the NFL in hopes of one day being a professional football player. He didn't give up. He entered some arena football leagues, and he did really well there. He went to their quote-unquote Super Bowl like 2 times. And so he was a good player. And then finally, in 1998, he got an offer to go and play with the St. Louis Rams. And that year, he didn't play. He played in the last game, maybe like 11 plays, so he really didn't do much. But in 1999, his life changed forever. So it was in the preseason, and this is when they're practicing, they're getting ready for the regular season, and the starting quarterback, Trent Green, he suffered a season-ending injury. And at this point, Kurt Warner, he was the backup to the backup quarterback. So he ended up starting that year, and he went on to do more than just lead their team and have them do kind of well. He led the St. Louis Rams to have one of the greatest offenses in NFL history. To this day, they're known as the greatest show on turf. So basically, his rookie year, he goes and he leads his team to a Super Bowl. After, just 5 years later, he was stocking shelves at a grocery store for $5.50. Obviously, minimum wage has changed since then. But he went on, they won the Super Bowl. He was named the NFL MVP of the regular season as well as the Super Bowl. And he became the first quarterback to throw for over 400 yards in a Super Bowl. So when Kurt Warner got the call, he answered it, and it was the call of a lifetime. It's what many would consider, wow, just like the peak of maybe human existence. And, I relate to Kurt Warner a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. I don't. But I do have a story. Just growing up, my mom had me involved in sports since I was like 5. I was playing hockey and baseball and track, and I started to play volleyball. And when I was 14, I started to play volleyball a little bit more competitively. And then when I turned 15, my mom was like, okay, you got to pick one sport because you're gone every single weekend. You need to slow it down and focus up. And so I decided, I'm going to play volleyball after only playing it for about a year. And I decided, I want to be an Olympic volleyball player. Like, that's my goal, that's my mission. And so to get there, you have to go to university. That's the normal process that people go through. And I remember, I wanted to go to Penn State University. Penn State in the States for volleyball, it's like the school if you're in the East Coast. Like, if you're good at volleyball, you go to Penn State. And if you're in California, you go to those schools, UCLA, all those, USC. But on the East Coast, Penn State. And I remember I was about 17, and my mom was on the phone with someone that night. And she goes, hey, there's someone who wants to talk to you. And I remember I was like, who could this be? I picked up the phone. They're like, hey, this is so-and-so from the Penn State Nittany Lions. And we would love for you to come and be a part of our team. And, we want to redshirt you, which means your first year you don't play. You just practice, you get stronger, you get better, and then your next 4 years you play. And, they weren't going to give me a scholarship, but if I did well enough, maybe I could earn it. I was just so, flabbergasted. This was such a surreal moment for me. And I remember I got off the phone, and my mom was like, so what did they say? I said, wow, they want to redshirt me, but they're not going to give me a scholarship. And we found out that it was $40,000 to go there a year. And so my mom's like, no, you're not going. And so that dream was shut down. But I ended up going to another good school for volleyball. And I'll always remember that, wow, the Penn State coach called me and gave me an opportunity, even though I didn't take it. So I just wanted to open up for you guys. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but we all have moments in our life where we're like, wow, this is my moment. This is that surreal feeling that I have. What have been some of your greatest calls or surreal invitations that you guys have received? And more on the positive side, because obviously there can be some negative ones as well. So just go ahead, raise your hand. The greatest call, it's a figure of speech used to describe a higher calling. It's a profound invitation to step up and out, to become something more, and to move beyond your current reality and perceived capabilities into a higher purpose. It requires us to make a decision to either accept or shrink back. Some, as people have shared here, getting a new job with double the salary, maybe being in a movie or a show, whatever that moment is for you. There's also people who have worked really hard to be doctors, and they've studied so hard, and they've gone through medical school, and they got accepted, and then they finally reached it, and it must feel so good to get there. Same for lawyers, and some people are called to be astronauts and go to space and work for NASA or maybe now Tesla. Some are called to be policemen, firefighters, politicians, scientists, consultants, accountants, desk workers, waiters, construction workers, and engineers. I think I got them all. But I believe, models as well. But I believe that there's one call that is above them all, and that is to follow Jesus. Today we're going to be reading from the Bible, a little bit about the Bible if you're unfamiliar. Most people consider it one book. It's actually a collection of books. So there's 66 books in the Bible, and we're going to be reading a book called Mark. We don't know exactly who wrote the book of Mark. We think it might have been this guy named John Mark, who was an early follower of Jesus. And there's some modern scholars who say maybe it was written anonymously. So we're not 100% sure. But Mark is one of the Gospels. So in that 66 books that are in the Bible, 4 of them are the Gospels. And gospel just meaning good news. What's that good news? That Jesus came, he died for us, so that way we could spend eternity with him. And spoiler alert, he rose from the dead as well. So we get to spend eternity with him. But yeah, so just to give us some context about the book of Mark, this is really, it talks about the life of Jesus, okay? So let's go ahead and read here, verse 16. It says, "As Jesus was walking along the shore of Lake Galilee, he noticed 2 brothers fishing, Simon and Andrew. He watched them as they were casting their nets into the sea and said to them, 'Come, follow me, and I will transform you into fishers of men instead of fish.' Immediately, they dropped their nets and left everything behind to follow Jesus." So Jesus is walking along the Lake of Galilee, and he tells some people, "Hey, come follow me." They immediately drop their nets and go. Walking a little farther, Jesus found 2 other brothers sitting in a boat along with their father, mending their nets. Their names were Jacob and John, and their father Zebedee. Jesus immediately walked up to them and invited the 2 brothers to become his followers. Jacob and John dropped their nets, stood up, left their father in a boat with the hired men, and followed Jesus. So oftentimes Jacob, means the same as James, so most translations have that. And then Simon is known as Peter as well in a lot of Bibles and religious communities. Simon and his brother Andrew, they see Jesus and they leave their possessions. While James and John, they get called by Jesus and they leave their dad in the boat. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine, you're at work and Jesus comes in and says, "Hey, come follow me," and you just get up and leave? Imagine quitting on the spot. There's no 2-week notice. There's no 2-week notice. There's a conversation, "Hey, Jesus is, here, and he wants me to follow him. How do you feel about that?" Are you going to be okay? What about the family business? What's going to go on with that? I just want to ask you guys. Oh, sorry. I'm getting a call. I'm going to have this on mute. Hello? Okay. Wait, really? Okay. All right, guys, it's not an emergency, but I actually have to go right now. Seriously. So. All right, you guys, joke's up. Thanks for letting me use your phone. But, imagine that. You guys sensed it. I wanted to be a little bit more shocking. I missed there, but yeah. So, but can you imagine that? What if I just left? The anxiety, what's going to happen? What's going on? I want to ask you guys, if Jesus walked into your workplace today and said, "Follow me," what is the first thing you'd worry about leaving behind and why? We learn that Zebedee is in business. Zebedee's business is in business with Peter and Andrew. So they were working together, both of, Simon, Andrew, James, and John. And they, from doing a little bit of research, the history, they were probably doing okay. Fishermen back then, they tended to be wealthy, and so they were doing okay. They probably were set for life. They're probably going to have this plan to take over their dad's business, and they already have hired workers, and so life is good for them. It's comfortable. Yeah, they're fishing. Maybe they like it, maybe they don't, but they have their needs taken care of in a sense. Doing more research, I just want to add more context to this as well. So Jesus was a rabbi. Now, a rabbi is a teacher. And it would have been an honor to have been called by Jesus to say, when he says, "Hey, come follow me," that would have been an amazing honor. Because the thing about Jesus is he kind of does things differently. He likes to flip things upside down. And so the normal way of doing things back then is a student would actually seek out a rabbi. The student would seek out the teacher. And the rabbi was one of the ultimate social symbols. It was like the ultimate social status back in Jewish culture. It was one of them. Priest was also one. And, growing up, you would want your kid to be a rabbi. Like that would be your hopes and dreams. Like some people hope for their kids to be doctors and lawyers and, just to do really well in life. That's what their parents would have wanted. And I'm sure some kids wanted to be rabbis growing up. So around the age of, 5 or 6, most boys and some girls would go to school and they would study this thing called the Torah. So the Torah is simply the first 5 books of the Bible. And their job by the age of 12 was to memorize the Torah. And let me tell you, that is a lot to memorize. If you've ever looked at the first 5 books of the Bible, that's going to take you a little bit. So they're studying, they're trying to memorize the scriptures, and by the age of 12 or 13, whoever decides, I don't know, the teachers, if you're good enough or if you're special enough or capable enough, you move on to the next thing. And if you're not deemed worthy, you would go back home to your family and you would take on your father's profession. And so, if you make it past the first round, then you go to the next one, you're continuing to study scripture, and then you would go seek a rabbi that you want to follow and be like. And then that rabbi would scrutinize you and question you, and because they want someone who's going to be capable of, taking on what they believe, their opinions about things, their thoughts about scripture. But in this culture, there was this underlying message that when you came back to your father's work around 12 or 13, that you weren't cut out for being an expert in the Torah. There was this underlying message that you just aren't good enough. Looks like, hey, go get those nets and let's get out there on the boat, let's start fishing, And there was also this message that the working people So Jewish culture was kind of divided between the religious elites and the working people. And it was perceived that the working people weren't as close to God as the religious elites. Because back then, the Jewish culture, they had over 400 laws that they needed to follow. So the religious elites, they wanted everything done to a T. Like, they were very serious about following the law. And the workers, like, they have to provide for their families. They're just not able to, follow all the laws to that degree. And so therefore they were seen as maybe ignorant, just not as close to God as the religious elites. But the thing is, we look at Jesus, and he didn't go to the religious elites and say, follow me. He went to the everyday guy and said, follow me. And what he's saying when he's saying, follow me, is he's saying, I believe in you. I believe that you can be like me. I want you to follow me. I choose you. So it would have been such an honor to be called by Jesus, because it's not how things happened back in that culture. So talking about Zebedee, the dad here, I thought about how must have he have been feeling. And the truth is, he probably would have been thrilled. He probably would have been thrilled that his kids were being called to follow a rabbi. Because every parent wanted their kid to become a rabbi one day. It would be the equivalent of your kid getting a full ride to university, like a super prestigious university. You would be so proud. The only thing is, you might not be so thrilled if you're Zebedee, because you're like, I don't know about this Jesus guy. They knew a little bit about Jesus, some of the miracles that he did. Word got around town. Man, Jesus, this guy, he went to a party and he turned water into wine. He's done some miracles. That's pretty cool. But also, he's homeless. I don't know if I want my kids hanging out with this guy. What about the other rabbis, James and John? They got a house where they study and they're doing a little bit better. I don't know about Jesus. He just seems, I don't know about him. And maybe you have kids and they hang out with some friends and you question their character a little bit. You're like, man, I'm glad that they have friends, but I don't know. Jury's still out. And I think that might have been how Zebedee was feeling. And of course, the shock. They just left and, okay, my business plan is gone. At least when you send your kids to university, they have a dorm. When you're sending your kids off with Jesus, it's they could be anywhere. They could be out in the woods, praying. We don't know where they are. How am I going to find you? It's an amazing feeling when you're on a new journey, isn't it? When you feel like you've been called to do something that maybe you didn't think you were capable of doing. It's that pressure of rising up to the calling in that moment. And the truth is that call still stands today. Jesus is calling each of us to follow him, to put down our metaphorical nets, the places of comfort and familiarity. Jesus is asking that we put our trust in him. And here's the beautiful part. This invitation is open for everybody. Jesus wants every single person to follow him. And the best part is, you don't need a 4.0 GPA. You don't need to have memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. In fact, you don't have to have anything memorized. You didn't have to be the captain of your football team in high school. You didn't have to be a cheerleader. You didn't have to hang out with the cool kids. You don't need a certain amount in your bank account. And you don't have to be good enough. There's nothing that you could have done that Jesus is actually, no, don't follow me. You did that one thing, so no, you can't follow me. In fact, Jesus came for all of us. sinners. What does that word mean? Sin means, it was an archery term, to miss the mark. We missed what God had intended for us. We've fallen short of his plan, and we've chosen to do things our way. And we have an opportunity to try to follow him. And we're going to stumble along the way, but God cares mostly about our hearts. So when we answer the call in faith, putting our trust in Jesus, not knowing where we're going, it changes our destiny. It literally changes our lives and the direction of our lives. I remember when I had a big moment where I was called to follow Jesus. And this was back in university. And again, I still wanted to be an Olympic volleyball player, but I was just so distracted. I was smoking, I was drinking, I was partying all the time. And then I was failing drug tests at university. I was getting in a lot of trouble, almost got kicked out. And there was just this one day I was on my skateboard a few days after I had failed a drug test. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And this guy was just walking. And he asked me, some question about God, and we started chit-chatting, and come to find out he was a pastor who lived a few doors down from me. And we started talking about what it meant to trust God. And we started looking at the Bible and just what it meant to follow Jesus. And I finally decided, I am going to put my trust in God. I'm going to change my life. Because before it would be, to compare it to the fishermen, it would have been like me being a fisherman and then Jesus saying, hey, come follow me, and me from the boat being like, I'm going to follow you. Don't worry, Jesus. Like, I love you a lot. I'm your biggest fan. And I would have just stayed at my net. That's kind of the life that I was living. And then I said, you know what? I actually need to get out of the boat and leave my old life behind and follow Christ. And even now, I haven't smoked, I haven't drank really. My life has changed quite a bit. But now I can kind of get into this comfort zone of, all right, I have my place, I have my TV, my computer, my phone. And I also don't think that being consumed by those things is what it means to follow Jesus. Not that those are bad things, but I'm trying to be ready for the next call. Like, where is Jesus calling me now? So, we can become, if your goal is to become an Olympian or a professional athlete or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever the case may be, those things aren't bad. But I believe the greatest call is to follow Jesus. And I'm not saying to, right after this lesson to go call your boss and tell him that you quit. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I think he wants us to be a light where we are and to show what it means to follow Jesus. And ultimately, it's because God just wants to spend time with us. He wants us to be with him in eternity, and that's just because he loves us. And so just want to open it up for any last minute thoughts.